You're entering the MSP Zone, a podcast for the managed services community, covering news, analysis, and interviews from around the globe. Elevate your MSP game by staying in the MSP Zone. And now, your host, Charles Weaver.
Hey. Welcome to the MSP Zone, where we talk about everything and anything related to managed services, cloud computing. It's what we do. It's what we've been doing for 22 years. Yeah, 22 years. You heard me right. Today we're talking about cyber standards and why specifically there should be and there is an MSP-specific cyber standard. And there's a couple of things that caused me to kind of want to talk about this. We've been talking and writing a lot about MSP legislation, right? MSP protection laws. We just did an episode about that not too long ago. And there's if you're spotting a theme, a recurring theme here, you're not wrong, right? You are seeing a theme because there's a lot of things that are happening independent, many of them, from one another, but they're all headed in the same direction. And the fact that they don't know that they're headed in the same direction is kind of curious. But that's what we do. We spot curious things and we comment on them. So the MSP legislation that we've been seeing for the last couple of years, that's one of them. There was recently, I don't know if you guys saw this, but we'll capture this in the show notes. There was a cybersecurity supply chain bill that the United States Senate just passed. It is not law yet, but it's a very interesting take on where our U.S. government here in the United States is headed with regards to supply chain security and protection. But that is very similar and dovetails very nicely into the argument for cyber standards, and specifically for MSP cyber standards. And you may be saying, well, what is the difference? Why would you say MSP cyber standard versus regular or just non-MSP cyber standard? Is there a difference, you may ask? To me, there is a difference. And there's a reason why you would want to have one specific to MSPs and something for non-MSPs. And it's not just because I'm working for the MSP Alliance. It's my considered professional opinion that there is enough uniqueness associated with the MSP profession and the operation of a managed service provider company or division within a larger company that necessitates unique and MSP-specific requirements. If you are in the MSP profession, which I know a lot of you are listening to this, you know this already. You know this, but you may not be able to articulate it. Maybe you haven't just had time to think about it and fully form an opinion on it. So I'm hoping that this discussion is going to help you put some context around the very large macro concept things that are happening today. And let's just dive right in. What is the argument for an MSP-specific cyber standard? So also in the show notes, I'm going to add an article that was published in 2012 in a little publication, newspaper called the Wall Street Journal. And it was 10 years ago that I wrote this article, and it was, I think, basically the case or the argument for a universal standard for cloud computing. And it was about cloud computing, which was at that time making, it was only a couple of years old in terms of being very popular and talked about, right? Since mid to late 2009 is when cloud computing really started to grasp and get a foothold. And so a handful of years later, we were dealing with a lot of issues related to cloud computing, right? Cost issues, migration cost issues, reliability issues. We had not yet gone into the security aspect of that, which we obviously are seeing that today. But take a look at that article, because for a 10-year-old article, it talks a lot about and is incredibly relevant to many of the discussions we are having today. But why do we need an MSP-specific cyber standard? And what are the distinctions between having internal cyber controls and policies compared to customer-centric cyber controls and policies? To the layperson, to the uninitiated, you might say, well, there should just be one. Cybersecurity is cybersecurity. Just have one standard and let that be it. And that would be a very common voice in the, how should we say it? In the NIST community, in the CMMC community. There is a belief now amongst certain self-proclaimed cybersecurity experts that, well, NIST just answers all of your questions. NIST is it. NIST and CMMC specifically, that's where you need to be. And I can appreciate that the Department of Defense has put a lot of chips behind CMMC. They've staked that very aggressively, and I think that they need to. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. But we've seen this before. We've seen this before with banking and with healthcare, where the idea is that all you need is for security is built right into HIPAA, or all you need for security is right there in Gramm-Leach-Bliley, GLBA. Right. Every time a new standard comes along, there's this instinct by some to push that as a one size fits all, and I just don't think that that's true. For almost 20 years, the MSPs have had MSP Verify, and that is our standard. We use it in our industry. It's globally accepted. MSPs all over the planet have it, and it's been around for a while. It's been tested. It's been it's constantly improved and shaped and sharpened, and that's what MSPs can leverage as a guidepost to how they should be operating their MSP company or MSP division, and that's that. I'm not going to spend. It's not a marketing or advertisement for MSP Verify. You can go read about it yourself. But why I am talking about MSP-specific cyber standards is because there's a lot of MSPs out there, and a lot of you guys, you know who you are, who are coming to us and saying, hey, I'm having conversations with my customers, and they're saying that I should go get CMMC. Get CMMC. Or they're saying, we need to go get ISO 27001. Or I need to get a SOC 2. And they're saying all these things. And these are customer requests, right? And they're going to their MSP saying, I need this, fill in the blank, whatever the standard is. And the MSPs come to us and say, is this true? Is this right? Is this what we need? And that's a big issue, and it's an important one. So number one, you're not dumb for questioning all of this. You're not. It's complex material. It's complex stuff to think about, and it's good for you to question motives and also the sanity, not the logic. The logic. It's good to question the logic of why and what your customers are asking you for, you as the MSP. Because what you could do is end up doing a lot of work, bearing great expense, and not doing a damn thing to make your MSP practice better. And that is one of the biggest arguments for not just solely relying on external, non-MSP specific standards. And I'll give you a great example. So ISO has been out there for a long time, longer than CMMC. ISO is a very well-known standard. And I'm talking about ISO 27001 specifically. We map to ISO, so I understand ISO. It's not like we're not anti-ISO, but I'll say this: there are some real limitations to ISO 27001 when applied to a managed services environment, and I would say there are significant structural deficiencies when it comes to ISO, the full certification, and how it's tested, how it's applied, and the compliance or lack thereof value of ISO in certain situations. Oh, what do you mean by that? What deficiencies are you talking about? It doesn't have a report. It's not tested over a period of time. It doesn't have, compared to other standards like SOC 2 and MSP Verify, both of which have reports, there's no authentication is not the right word. There's no authority behind it. Like with SOC and with MSP Verify, there are certified audit accounting firms who have licenses or can practice with the imprimatur of the state, have a global profession. They've been around for ages. They know how to test and sample and grab populations and do the things that statistically will make it more likely that the results and the opinion associated with the report are valid, compared to what I think is ISO is a very good standard applied in a very substandard way. And I'm not the only person to think that, and I certainly could make the same argument to CMMC. It's a good standard. I think they have a half-baked, so far, application of how that standard is going to be applied, and I think that it's there's a lot of waste and inefficiency in that. And I'm not saying that the way that the accountants do things with SOC reports are necessarily perfect. Everything can improve, but I'm trying to give you an example of how when customers come to you and they say, "I need you to become ISO compliant," or "I need you to become CMMC compliant," or "I need you to become HIPAA compliant," these are all pressures. These are problems that your customers are bringing to you and laying them at your feet and expecting you to pick them up. And while that is a very natural component to the managed services relationship MSPs have with their customers, there is a distinction, and you must understand that there's a distinction between what your obligations are internally as an MSP compared to the obligations your customers have to do things. And those are not always the same. Do you guys understand what I'm saying there? It's a really important point. Your obligations as an MSP are not always the same. In fact, they're frequently very different obligations that you have as an MSP compared to the obligations your customers, the managed services customers specifically, have. And it gets back to, if you've ever listened to past episodes when we've had Rob Scott on, he and I talk, this is just like an ongoing thing with us for almost 20 years. We've been talking about this, is that there is a practical limit to what any organization can transfer to another organization or from one human to another human, right? I'm talking about risk. And anytime you hear these statements like, I need you, my MSP, to make me compliant with CMMC, or I need you to become compliant with CMMC. Mark my words, there is an attempt, knowingly or unknowingly, to transfer risk to you, the MSP. And some risk can be transferred wisely or unwisely, and some risk cannot be. Right? If I'm a customer, I cannot shift to my MSP all of my obligations, let's say under my state data breach notification laws, right? I cannot wipe away all that risk and shift it over to my MSP. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about risk transference. There is a limit to what you can do. And the same is true with these standards. So when you start to have discussions with customers and they're saying things to you like, I'd love to work with you. I'd love to continue working with you. We have a great relationship, but I need you to become CMMC. Why? The questions I would have are, why do you think that? What do you know about CMMC that you believe we don't do? What is it that you need to demonstrate to someone who's asking you perhaps to have CMMC or ISO or HIPAA? Start to have these conversations with your customers. Because I would wager a fair amount of money that in the end, you will identify a significant number of areas where your customers are not doing something that they should be doing, and you, the MSP, could help them if the customer only allowed that to happen. And these compliance and these cyber standard conversations that are happening more and more frequently out there are fantastic opportunities for you, your sales and marketing or account team members, whoever is tasked with this type of thing. Start to have really meaningful discussions, and don't make it just, I'll take care of CMMC. Yeah, I'll take care of whatever. Don't give in. That nobody learns anything that way. You won't learn anything, and your customers won't learn anything. Start to ask them why. Start to ask them specifics. Get into the details of motive. What is it that is prompting this? Do they understand what it is they're looking after? And we get this a lot, right? We get this a lot with even some of our members who have things like MSP Verify and SOC 2 reports. There is a lot of misunderstanding. We did an episode not too long ago called the armchair cybersecurity expert, right? There are a lot of armchair compliance experts, people who think that they know compliance because they were given a piece of paper with a series of boxes that they have to check off, and they think that that's what it takes to become a compliance professional. Well, of course, we know that it doesn't. But back to this concept of the internal MSP standard versus the external customer standard. These are two very different things. They can have, and they do have, some significant overlaps and areas of commonality. One example of that would be multi-factor authentication, right? There are only so many ways that you can implement and develop a control and a process utilizing multi-factor authentication. There are different technologies, to be sure. So we intentionally keep it vague, but to say we want you to have multiple layers of authentication for users accessing certain things of importance is a best practice. There's no debate about it. It's a known truth. And it's the same for an MSP internally as it is for their customers. So that would be a great example of a control that would appear in a standard that a customer would say, well, I need proof that you're using multi-factor authentication. All right, fair. Every MSP ought to be able to prove that you use MFA. If you're an MSP verified company, you'd give them your MSP verify report and it would say it. MSP company uses MFA. And this is how they use it. This is what applications and what systems that they use to protect using MFA. Very easy. But if it gets into other things such as backing up data, what if the customer says, well, I need to see evidence of backup? Well, I can tell you there's a lot of examples of the MSP backing up their internal data and offering backup as a service to the customer, and the customer says, no, thanks, I don't want to pay for that. But you see what the customer just did there? They shifted their lack of internal backup as a customer and put that control back on the MSP to say, well, are you backing up your data? Because if you're backing up your data, then I can check that my box off and my compliance check is valid and I can move on to the next thing. You see how that isn't true? That's what I'm talking about. That's what is happening on a variety of fronts, technical and business, all related to risk in some way. But that's why we have differences. Because the MSP has different applications than the customer. The MSP has to back up different things. They have to have different models of resiliency to combat against cyber ransomware attacks. And the customers may have completely different applications, completely different pressures and risks related to their cyber resiliency. There could be some similarities, yes, but there won't necessarily be identical. In fact, I would think that they would be more likely, more often than not, areas of distinct dissimilarity. And that is why you need to have your own internal MSP cyber standards that you apply to how you deliver your services and how you operate as an MSP company or division, and why you need to have very different concepts of what your customers' compliance needs are, and understand where those similarities are between the two and where the distinctions are. And understand that there will be distinctions, and understand that this is not just a check-the-box system. There has to be some thought put into this. And that's why we have MSP distinct cyber standards, and there's all these other cyber standards out there that are really good, some of them better than others, some of them a lot better than others. And let your customers figure those things out. But try to not just instinctively give in to this notion that just because your customer says, I need you to become CMMC compliant, that may not be the best standard for you. In fact, if you're an MSP, there are going to be significant gaps if you applied CMMC only to your organization. There are going to be significant areas of subject gap. I mean, it just doesn't address things that the MSPs do. Same with ISO, same with HIPAA, same with GLBA, same with ITIL. There's a lot of stuff. That is why we have an MSP standard like MSP Verify. It's why it exists. And it doesn't mean that you don't become experts in CMMC. It doesn't mean you don't become experts in GLBA or in HIPAA or ISO or GDPR or any of the other frameworks that may exist out there. Some are frameworks, some are actual laws. But you do need to be aware of them, but you need to be understanding of how they differ from what your obligations are. So here's my challenge to all of you. For 2022, it's not something you're going to do overnight, but start it today. Start it today. Get out a piece of paper, open up a Word document, do whatever you have to do. Start developing and articulating your internal MSP controls, and start to write them down. If that's too confusing, start looking at policies, start looking at process and procedure, how you do things. Start with the fundamentals. How do you back up your internal data? How do you protect yourself against ransomware? How do you respond to cyber attacks? How do you handle trouble tickets? How do you handle event correlation, right? Something very, very unique to the MSP, right? That very, very little application to the end user. And you go through that and start small and build onto that. And that is how you will start to develop your internal cybersecurity and other. It's not just cyber. I'm talking internal policies and procedures for MSPs. Start there. And as you continue your dialogue with your customers and you begin to really cultivate through these conversations what their true needs are, you'll start to see similarities between the things that they're asking for, like the MFA example I brought up earlier, that really do correlate to what you do and to what not just one, but all of your customers need to be doing. And yes, you will find some variance. If you have different types of customers in different vertical markets, yeah, if you have banking customers and you have medical customers, you're going to see some distinctions there about how those two vertical market channels need to be treated. But that's okay. As long as you are acknowledging those distinctions, and as long as you are starting to educate those customers on what your obligations are as an MSP compared to what you can do to help them, the customer, meet their security and other obligations. That is a good path to start walking down. And that will help your customers understand that there is a distinction between what they're responsible for and what you, their MSP, is obligated to do. And quite frankly, I think that if we could accomplish that this year, that would be a fantastic step forward in MSP relations with customers. It would really help on multiple fronts. But give those two articles a read. They're still relevant. The Wall Street Journal article is still out there. I think you might need a subscription to gain access to it, but it's definitely worth it. And the other article about the supply chain bill is a good quick read and worth your time. Until next time, that's it for now.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a like. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so you will get notified when future episodes are released. We will see you next time in the MSP Zone.